Hi everyone, I'm Liam Eagle. I'm the editor here at the Web Host Industry Review, and I would like to welcome you all to another one of our WHIR webinars. Today's session is called Learn How to Evaluate Lead Generation Options for B2B Technology Companies and the Critical Questions You Need to Ask. A bit of a long name, but I think I did well. And it's going to feature a presentation from Hartland Ross, who is president of eBridge Marketing Solutions. I'll let Hartland introduce himself properly in a moment, but before we go any further, I'd like to take care of a couple of housekeeping items. So first of all, as for questions, we are going to save a few minutes at the end of the session for your questions. However, we want to keep this thing sort of engaged and lively, so you can feel free to submit them throughout the session using the question functions in the webinar software. I will be keeping an eye on those throughout the whole thing, as will Nicole Henderson from our editorial team, who is also here on the webinar with us. And we'll be responsive to those throughout. But as far as putting the questions to Hartland, we're going to save some of that until the very end of the session. If you do ask a question that doesn't get answered, either because we ran out of time or maybe it's a bit too specific, you can rest assured that we do have a record of all the questions that were asked and who asked them, and somebody's going to follow up with you via email or something like that after the webinar. Or if you have a question that you'd rather just ask outside of a public forum like this, I believe Hartland's going to put some of his contact info on screen during the Q&A period at the end, so you can definitely reach out that way. As for reviewing the slides, there will be a video archive of the webinar available. If you want to revisit part of the presentation or share it with somebody else, it'll be in the archives at thewhir.com/webinars as of early next week, and it'll be there alongside a lot of our other great past webinars, so that's definitely worth a look. And as for getting the slides themselves, I'll let Hartland answer that when he's when he's presenting. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that today's webinar is sponsored by our own WHIR networking events, which, if you don't already know, are a series of really excellent networking events in a series of a variety of locations around the U.S. They're set up sort of like a really casual cocktail party kind of atmosphere. They're sponsored by some really interesting vendors who, really relevant to the hosting business, and they're a lot of fun. So next week we're going to be down in Phoenix, Arizona. So if you're nearby, please do come out to it. If you know anybody from the hosting business in the area, you can let them know. We'll also be in New York City in October and in Raleigh, North Carolina in November. So, plan your plan your schedule accordingly. You can find out more information on the WHIR website. Click the WHIR events in the navigation tab, or you can follow us on Facebook or Twitter, and we're usually sharing information about that for more info. So now, without any further ado, I will turn things over to Hartland, and we can get things started. So, Hartland, why don't you introduce yourself while I hand you the sort of presenter controls here.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Liam. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, and I guess potentially good evening to some of you. I'm just going to make sure that everybody can see my screen. Liam, is that showing up okay?
Looks great. Excellent.
So my name is Hartland Ross. I'm the president of eBridge Marketing Solutions, and my contact details are up here on the slide, but as Liam said, they'll also be at the end. So welcome any questions at the end of the presentation, and if you don't get those answered here today, then as Liam said, I'm happy to take a call or speak with you offline. We specialize in working with B2B technology companies, and so hence today's discussion is all around lead generation options for B2B technology companies. So with that, I'll jump in here. So really, the purpose of today's presentation is to give you an understanding of some of the different options that are available to you as a B2B marketer, and not necessarily saying that this is comprehensive and that there aren't any other options, but trying to group the different opportunities for you into essentially three main buckets. And there's a lot of different considerations when running these programs, and so what I'm trying to do is to give you some idea of cost, some questions to answer or ask and be answered for yourself, and a method and criteria to evaluate ultimately how effective these campaigns might be for you. So hopefully you'll be able to make smarter and more effective decisions. So that's the idea, and hopefully we get through that and accomplish that today. Should be about 40 minutes or so, something like that. So They're really, we're looking at three different types of programs. The first one is, and these are not necessarily industry standard terms, at least the first one anyway, form fills. So that's one option. Another option is more standard term, but content syndication networks. And then the third option is essentially one where you would try to run some kind of lead generation program doing it all yourself. And we'll cover the different scenarios and really some of the pros and cons of each. So the first one is form fills. And basically what we'd be looking at here is a relatively simplistic form that would have a few fields, a limited number of fields, maybe 4 or 5 fields, first name, last name, email address, and maybe 1 or 2 brief questions. So it might say if you're interested in let's say shared or dedicated type plan, or are you interested in Windows or Linux? So it's very simplistic, doesn't really give a lot of information. A lot of times these forms are common in a B2C space, so things like mortgage leads, mortgage refinancing, credit card forms, perhaps small business loans, small business refinancing loans, those types of things. So that's a kind of common scenario. They also can be used in co-registration situations, but basically the idea is that there's limited information. And so there's no assets being used in these types of programs. Essentially, an asset being, we'll discuss this, but an asset being like a white paper, or webinar, or some other downloadable item, something that the visitor is going to get in exchange for filling out the form. So this is simply a matter of filling the form, and someone will contact you, and they know that they're going to be presented with a proposal, or a salesperson is going to end up following up. They tend to be, probably for obvious reasons, but they tend to be less qualified. There's less information. The law of reciprocity is not there, being broken to some extent. So a lot of reciprocity says, if you do something for me, I'll do something for you. And because of the fact that they're not actually getting anything in exchange for giving up their contact information, then the lead tends to not really have a whole lot of onus on sort of how interested they really are. Another really important consideration here is that the leads may not be exclusive. So that means that if you're purchasing leads and you're paying on a per lead basis for these types of visitors, that these leads may also be sold at the same time to potentially some of your competitors, or it may not be a competitor. It may just be a company offering a service where the same sort of criteria apply. And as a result, you may want to ask whether these are exclusive or not. And when I say exclusive, it actually doesn't mean to one other company. It potentially could mean up to 4 or 5 other companies. We haven't really seen much that goes beyond that, but certainly it's conceivable that there would be a number of other parties. And it's also conceivable that they may not be exclusive yet, that no one else just happens to be purchasing at the same time as you, and so you end up with the benefit of sort of a lower priced lead, but you're technically not going to be competing against anybody else, because at that time there's nobody who's confirmed to, no other marketer who's confirmed to purchase those leads. Another question when you're looking at these programs, and some of the others we'll discuss, is how quickly you would receive the leads. So if the lead is filled in today, are you going to receive those leads today, or are you going to receive those leads tomorrow, or are they going to be batched on some other frequency, like, for example, weekly? Do you have to log in to get those leads, or is there another method for those leads to be distributed to you and perhaps integrated into an existing CRM like Salesforce or some other program that you use? And what level of customization can be done? And normally the level of customization is minimal to non-existent, as I mentioned, but it's conceivable that you may be able to have a question that's added, although that will typically adjust the cost that you're going to pay on a per lead basis. So the first one was form fills, and then the next one that we came up with in the beginning here was content syndication. And really what we're talking about here is some sort of content, some sort of asset. So it may be a white paper, it may be a webinar, it might be a video, it might be, let's say, a buyer's guide, best practices, downloadable kit, report of some sort, but basically something that someone can have access to in exchange for giving up information. And so what we're going to focus on are the two most common formats, which are either white papers or webinars. And of course, today's presentation is a perfect example of the webinar type format. So basically, focusing on these two initial options around white papers or webinar assets. A white paper is, for those of you who haven't got those developed or haven't used them before, but basically a program that, or rather a paper that is going to describe some sort of a problem and formulate solutions or suggested solutions that you specifically can fulfill on. Now, it doesn't mean to say that this is you need to walk the fine line between how salesy these are, whether they're are going to be ideally they should be educational in nature, but obviously you want to position your company as a good solution provider to the particular problem. So you might want to generate a number of different problems and then explain how you solve those. It may not be that you solve all of these problems, but that you solve at least some of them particularly well. And providing education, so really trying to focus on adding value, thought leadership, and really make a business case for the problem and the solution. Usually these are going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 12 pages in length, but certainly length can vary somewhat. Webinars, on the other hand, are often 30 to 45 minutes in length. They can be certainly shorter than that and potentially longer than that, but normally you want to allow a bit of time for questions, and rounding everything out to not much more than an hour is certainly about the max that you want to go. A lot of times webinars, of course, are going to have moderators, and Liam on the call today, of course, is playing that role, and that person will be able to do an introduction, facilitate questions, facilitate any challenges and whatnot. And there can be, of course, more than one moderator, or more than one facilitator as well, rather. So let's jump into the white papers and talk about that one next. So the first question is, well, I don't have a white paper written. What are my options to get one written? Obviously, you can do that in-house if you'd like, or you can hire the particular content networks, so the networks that syndicate the content, promote the webinars, promote the white papers. They can write a lot of times anyway, not across the board, but most of the time they'll be able to write the content for you if you like. Our experience has been that those tend to be quite expensive ways to go, so you're better off to look at either doing it in-house or hiring an external firm, agency, contractor, etc. to help you with that. Another option, if you don't want to write a white paper, you don't have the time, because these aren't things that you can generate in an afternoon. There's a lot of research and time that gets spent on them, and a lot of let's say editing and proofing and whatnot, and perhaps passing off to different levels for approval. To look at another option would be to sponsor existing content. So some sort of article or potentially a white paper that's been written already on some topic, and you would be a sponsor of that content. The nice point about doing that is that you end up in essentially a turnkey situation where you can plug it in and simply do not much more than add a logo to another article that's been written. On the other hand, there are downsides to that. So first one, of course, is that you may not necessarily be exclusive to sponsoring that content. It may be that on the last page or the first page, wherever the sponsors are listed, that your logo is one of a half dozen other logos. Normally, they're not going to put two competitors on there, but it's certainly conceivable that there'd be other sponsors at the same time. And the other one is that you don't have the same degree of control over the subject matter and the actual content, of course, that's in the article. Normally these are going to be existing, and so you're not going to be able to critique them and say, well, I'd like this to be focused a bit more around this topic or a little bit less around something else. So it's more of putting a square peg into a round hole to some extent, and the best option would be to look at creating your own white paper, but this is certainly another scenario for you. I mentioned that these white papers tend to be about 8 to 12 pages long. Again, some variation there, but if they're too long, you're going to end up losing the reader. You also want to make sure that when you're writing these that they're written for the dual purpose reader, for those that may not necessarily want to read all 12 pages if it's 12 pages long, rather to hit essentially the headings, and they may just read certain parts of it, or they may just read the headings themselves. White paper programs, so if you're going to generate leads using an asset in the format of a white paper, they tend to be less expensive leads than webinar leads. So that's another consideration. You're going to be looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10 to 20% less for a white paper based lead than a webinar lead. The nice thing about white papers and webinars, but I would say white papers are a little bit easier to do this with, is that you can have very, very specific subject matter. So that way you can target the content to a specific group. And this is a somewhat sneaky maybe way to make sure that your content is very targeted. But by creating a specific target, you may eliminate some potential leads. On the other hand, you're going to trade that off for a few lower volume but more quality-based leads to follow up on. So the more specific you can make it, you're going to eliminate those who are going to be perhaps just casually interested. It's unlikely they're going to read 12 pages of something that's detailed around cloud security if that's not in fact their interest. How frequently are the leads going to be delivered? So we talked earlier about saying that with the form fills about whether they're delivered daily or weekly or in some other frequency, and also in what sort of format, of course. So could they be delivered in a CSV format? Would they be delivered by uploading to an FTP address? Could they be delivered in some other format? Some cases there may be a login interface and whatnot. So that's another question to consider.
Hey, Hartland.
Yeah.
I was wondering. I know you've addressed a couple of specific types of content here, and I'm kind of curious whether you think that. I know you said that you can. A white paper, for instance, enable you to write to a certain customer that you're targeting. Do you think that certain types of content, either a white paper or a form fill like you mentioned before, or a webinar, are those different types of lead generation tools designed to get you in front of different types of customers?
Yeah, so good question. Our experience has been with form fills that the quality tends to be lower, and they're probably more suitable for a more simplistic buying process, buying decision. So a lot of times that's going to come down to a price point. So let's say, for example, a form fill might be more suitable if you're simply looking for shared leads, or maybe VPS leads if you're offering hosting solutions. But something where the price point and the sales cycle and the decision-making process are more simplified, more and faster. If you're looking for a more comprehensive purchase, longer sales cycle, then you'd be looking at either running a white paper or a lead generation, a white paper or a webinar lead generation program. You're going to get more data, and of course, in exchange for getting more data, you're providing them with some sort of an asset. Does that make sense?
Indeed, it does.
So just focusing on these white papers here in terms of looking at how to develop them and best practices. Again, choose your topic carefully. Really focus in on one, maybe two key issues. Again, the more specific it is, the tendency may be to try to appeal to a broad audience. My suggestion is to have different white papers focused on different challenges and to reach different decision makers with each one of those challenges, or possibly even the same one, but to really keep it focused on one or two key issues per white paper. So there's no reason why when you're running these programs, in fact it's better if you were to run multiple white papers simultaneously, or I should say maybe multiple assets, so they may not even all necessarily be white papers. So explain the problem thoroughly, talk to the pain points. What is the issue that your customer is, or potential customer is faced with, and of course how you can solve those challenges. Make it visually appealing. It's not all going to be textual based. Make sure that there's some graphics in there and that it's easy to read, that it flows well. Um, title is critical to success. It makes a big difference in terms of how appealing it's going to be for somebody to actually exchange their contact information and go through the process of downloading or getting access to the white paper itself. So make sure you've got a compelling title. And again, if you were to run these multiple times or use them across a number of different networks, for example, you may even want to consider testing different titles for the same white paper. And include credible sources. So if you've got data, you want to cite third-party sources to be able to back up those claims. And finally, make it shareable if you can. There are some instances where networks may not like that, because essentially what you're doing is you're paying for one lead, and then you're encouraging those leads to share that content with their colleagues, maybe internally within the same company or externally with their colleagues in the industry, and in which case you're going to be able to generate potentially some other leads, particularly if you're able to implement tracking solutions into PDF files and so forth. You'll be able to generate additional leads and, of course, not directly pay for those. So there may be some issues around that, and that might be another question that you want to ask. So we'll move on here, and we'll focus on webinars, change gears a little bit, and again, discussing the fact that you can produce them, or you can produce them yourself, rather, or hire someone to do that. It's difficult to do it externally in some cases, simply because the nature of the content. On the other hand, it not only might be something to consider, but it actually might be a good idea to consider finding some sort of third party who could facilitate the webinar and have somebody from the company play a role, either in terms of moderator or asking questions, or as a dual presenter situation. It'll add some credibility. So, for example, if you were to bring in a third party blogger, someone who's well known, well respected, that might be a good consideration when putting together webinars. And of course, webinars can be on demand, like on demand or live, or both. So today is live. Today is September 12th, and the other option is to run an on-demand program. Of course, most live programs, as Liam said, will end up ultimately being recorded and then become available on demand, and they'll continue to produce leads that way. There is some cachet in terms of running a live program. There's a sense that there's a sense of urgency, that people have to be available at that specific time, and that they might miss out if they don't attend. The other nice thing, of course, is you can have a live Q&A session, which you can't do if they're on demand. So that would be another question to ask, assuming that both are available as an option, and they're not always, but that's another question to look at. As mentioned earlier, the leads tend to be more expensive than white paper leads, 10–20% more. So you might want to weigh off the considerations of whether you're going to get a better quality lead that way. I'll talk a little bit later here in the presentation about discussions around appeal, but webinars tend to be valued more than white papers to some degree, and so as a result, the leads, there could be an argument to say that the leads are a little bit better. And again, subject matter needs to be very targeted. And again, this discussion around the frequency of delivery of the leads, and oftentimes they're going to be once per week, but if they're live, then typically right after recording the lead list, those who attended would be made available. So best practices for webinars, selecting a topic, something that's timely, something that's relevant, and of course, if you're running a webinar and you're discussing something that happened, so today's September 12th, let's say it was something related to September 11th from yesterday, this may not be quite so relevant to play or to listen to in 6 months from now or a year from now. So something to consider when you're talking about webinars and running them, that if you want something that's going to be timely, you may not want to reference specific events that happened recently, or something that's going to tie it to a specific time frame. Finding the right speaker. If you are looking at bringing in a third-party person who's an industry source or a recognized expert, as I said, that's a good idea. But if you're going to run it internally, you might want to double think or double check whether you want to use salesperson, they often end up coming across sounding like they're providing a bit of a sales pitch, and so it may be a good idea to include somebody else to facilitate those sessions. Obviously somebody who's comfortable doing that, but they may not necessarily be a salesperson. In fact, they may not even be a marketing person. Create a compelling title and emphasize the benefits of attending. So again, this is similar to the white papers with the sense that titles are important in terms of people completing these forms and wanting to get access to register. Focusing on the prospect's needs, again, their pain points, and to include a call to action. So particularly in webinars, what do you want them to do? Is there a trial that they can sign up for? Is there a free evaluation or some option that you can provide in the webinar, and links directly to a landing page? And I suggested that they generally be about 45 minutes long. They certainly can be shorter than that. The shortest one that I've been on has been about 15 minutes or so. I don't think you want to do much shorter than that, but again, rounding out about an hour is kind of where you want to top out. So targeting options, and one of the questions that you may be thinking is, well, what options do we have for targeting? And of course, this is going to vary somewhat from whether we're talking about form fills to a content syndication structure. But basically, first of all, standard data that would be collected regardless would include your first name, last name, email address, oftentimes, but not always, phone number, and maybe one or two quick questions if it's a form fill. Beyond that, if you're running a content syndication program, then as part of creating the criteria, the filters for the leads, things like employee size would be one of the questions that you'd want to answer, and so those typically come into buckets. So buckets of, let's say, 1 to 99 employees. That's often one bucket, and then the next one, there are different arrangements, but next one will commonly go up to about 500, and then 500 more or less to 1,000, and then 1,000 to 2, and 2 to 5, and over 5, that type of thing. So think about what the employee size bucket that you'd be wanting to target would be. And geography. Do you offer a service that's specific to North America, to the U.S. only, to specific states, to specific cities, greater San Francisco area, for example? So that's going to be certainly a factor to consider. If you're looking at geography and it's too specific, so as I mentioned in my example here a minute ago, San Francisco, if you're just targeting that area, it's first of all, it's virtually impossible to run content syndication programs that are going to be that specific. Most form fills won't do geo-targeting unless it's very broadly based, like, for example, U.S. or North America. But if geography is a possibility, first of all, the price does go up, but it's not that it can't be done, it's just that the volume is, in most cases, just not there, and that's why the networks will end up often saying no. So what you want to look at is trying to target, ideally, not even just one state, but several states, or a portion of the country. So, for example, you might want to say Pacific Northwest or Northeast or something that's a bit broader than just a specific state or two. But if you're got a service that's very regionalized, let's say it's co-location or some kind of IT solution where you need to physically go out and visit your customers, then this may not be the best approach for you to look at, or see if there's other ways that you can broaden it a little bit. By the way, if you're looking to structure these, it's a good idea to target employees and company size, employee size, within those set of standard filters versus the last point here, which is related to custom questions. So, for example, you could, in theory, have a question that says, how large is your company, how many employees do you have? And those custom questions become very expensive. And they become expensive because the number of leads that the networks would be able to deliver would drop down, and therefore they have to charge a premium for that. So you're better off putting that as a part of a standard filter than specifically asking that question outright. And if it's put in as a standard filter, then you just simply won't end up with those leads in the first place. The networks will screen those out, or if you do get them, you just won't pay for them. So custom questions tends to be, certainly again, it could be employee size, but I don't recommend that, but it could be other things like timeline for purchase. So you're interested in purchasing in the next 0 to 3 or 3 to 6 or 6 to 12 months. What is your budget for this project? Special requirements. What kind of platform, what kind of operating system do you use? These are all examples of potential custom questions. But again, beware. They do increase the cost, and they're very, very rarely used as a basis with which to reject a lead. In other words, if you were to say, well, I don't want anybody to, I'm not interested in following up or paying for any leads that answer the question of timeline to purchase of 6 to 12 months. I'm only interested in those who are interested in buying between now and a 6-month period. So if you were to say that, it's very unlikely you're going to be able to run a program paying simply based on those criteria. What you'll do is you'll end up with that information, but it won't be a basis with which to screen the leads out. And that may be an important consideration. On the other hand, the leads that may not fit your initial criteria, so for example, timeline for purchase, could be put into a lead nurturing program and followed up on, rather than sending directly to a sales team who may want to focus their time and limited resources on the prospects that are interested in purchasing right away. All right, so we're going to move on to cost and answer questions that you're probably thinking of, which is, well, what do these types of programs cost? What would I be looking at? If you're running a form fill, again, a program where you're just going to get limited data, there's no exchange for anything in terms of an asset or any reciprocal value that they're going to be getting, you can expect to pay somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 to $20, maybe $25 per lead. If you're looking at running a content syndication type lead, then you're going to be looking at a minimum of about $30 and upwards of $100. It can sometimes go a little bit higher than that, but that would be a good range. Probably an average would be in the neighborhood of, well, let's say $55 to $70, $75, something like that. And again, it's going to be a function of a lot of things. It's going to be a function of certainly the network that you're using, the site, the publisher, if you like. The targeting, geographic targeting, the topic of the asset. So how appealing is the specific subject matter? The fields that you are requesting, the custom questions, and then the asset type. So again, whether you're using a buyer's guide or a webinar or a white paper. Overall budget, this is really approximate, but you'd be looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of about $4,000 to $5,000 as a minimum. Not to say that there aren't programs that would run for less than that, and certainly not to say that there aren't ones that would run for more in terms of minimum requirements. Of course, it's all a function of how many leads you actually end up purchasing. So if you're purchasing thousands and thousands of leads, it's going to cost you more. But if you're just saying, look, we want to test this out, what kind of engagement level we'll be looking at, something in this range. Now, of course, this is simply just for the leads. You've got to also factor in that you need to create the assets if you're running those types of programs. And if you're going it alone, then it's a little bit of a different story, which is we'll jump into here in a moment. Timelines for deliverability, minimum of about 3 to 4 weeks for the administrative process. So evaluating, let's say you're looking at different opportunities, whether they, particularly if it's a content syndication type structure, this because there's sort of more moving parts and more options available. But to evaluate that, to make a decision, to create the content, to sign the paperwork, and then have the content posted live, which in and of itself may take the site or network up to 4 or 5 days to set up on their end. Sometimes there needs to be an abstract or summary of the white paper prepared. So all of these things, I would suggest if you're looking at a minimum of 3 to 4 weeks. If you don't have any content or webinars written, then you probably want to factor in just a little bit more time than that. Leads can be delivered over about 1 to 3 months. It can be certainly less than that, and it can be more. It's really up to you. But the important factor here is just that to make sure that your sales team, or if it's marketing automation solution where you're nurturing the leads, then you may be able to handle them in greater volumes. But if it's a sales team, it's going to be dictated in a large part based on the volume that they can handle. If you know that they've just come back from a conference and they're following up, or trade show and following up with a whole series of leads, and that this wouldn't be a good time to deliver them a few hundred extra, then you might want to look at timing them for when there's a bit of a lull in their cycle. All right.
Hey Hartland, can I interrupt you again here?
Sure.
So I'm interested in how you were sort of breaking down the cost per lead based on the network that you're involved with or the type of content that you're producing. I'm curious how the quality of the content, or I mean, you did mention before that writing great titles is key to generating good leads. With something like a white paper, how important is the quality of the white paper itself to the the returns that you're going to get from it, and how does that usually figure into negotiations with the network that you're going to be using to distribute it?
Well, so that's a good question. What it really does is I mentioned here, I guess it was on one slide back, but that the range is dependent to some extent on the asset type. So first of all, are you using a white paper, or are you using a webinar? And then also, as I mentioned, the topic. So if the topic is very specific well, if it's very specific, then it's going to drive the cost of the lead up, although, as I mentioned, you're going to trade off the quality versus quantity. But the title itself and the white paper itself, how it's written, the points that it covers are going to play a role affecting cost. And so many times the networks are going to want to see the content that they're going to be promoting on your behalf prior to giving a quote, or they'll give a quote and say that it's subject to verifying or vetting the asset that's being used. So in terms of answering the question, Liam, about the quality of the lead itself, certainly if a white paper is well written, well constructed, and isn't presented as a sales pitch, I think you're going to do well to create quality leads. But it really has a lot to do with the topic itself and the sort of the match between the problem, the pain points, and the solutions that you can offer.
Okay, so I wasn't necessarily talking about the quality of the lead so much as the price. For instance, if you're dealing with a hypothetical channel, some blog for distributing your white paper, and your white paper is, hypothetically speaking, I'm just going to think of the most terrible white paper I can think of. Let's say the title is 4 asterisks, right? And there's not even words. That's probably not going to have anybody signing up to download it, right? So, I mean, obviously that's an extreme. What if it's just kind of bad? I mean, is there a guaranteed this is going to provide you leads in the negotiation, or is this more like this is going to be an opportunity for you and you can do with it what you will? Like how do they usually treat the number and quality of leads that they're promising?
Okay, so the lead volume, so all of the assumption here so far, which is a great point you brought up, the assumption here is that we haven't really talked about is that there are going to be leads available. It is conceivable that if your topic is very specific and that your white paper is poorly worded and the title isn't very attractive, that you may get next to no leads or no leads at all. And so that's up to the networks to be able to make that call and decide how appealing this is going to be, and that's what will affect the price. They certainly may well reject it, and in which case you're going to have to go back to the drawing tables and either come up with a new topic or make it more appealing, more professionally written, etc. So there's no guarantee. We have run programs before where the asset was passed, so to speak. It was running, however, it just wasn't getting the traction. And so what ends up happening is you come back and say, well, I know we promised, or they promised that we'd be looking at about 100 leads this month. So far, we're 20 days into the month, and we've gotten you 6. We're going to have to do something about this, and we're going to need to look at some sort of a different asset, or we're going to need to adjust the targeting, so that whether it's geography or one of the other factors. I mean, obviously, I'm making it a bit of an extreme example. We wouldn't wait until the 20th of the month to realize that we're only 6% into a delivery. But it is conceivable that the leads they're not a guaranteed. So does that help, Liam?
Perfect.
All right, so performance expectations. So one of the questions you're probably thinking here is, well, okay, so what can I expect to see in terms of results? I mean, how do I know if this is going to make sense for me? I don't really want to spend all this money and put all this time in if I don't know what kind of results. Is it possible to try before I buy or to test on some small scale? These programs, when you're looking at content syndication, are difficult to test out without running a program at some kind of minimal level. The form fills, oftentimes you can buy a few $100s worth of leads on those ones and give it a go and see how you're making out, what kind of feedback you're getting, and then purchase more. But that's because there's sort of little invested on your part, little invested on their part. They just sort of turn it on and turn it off and whatnot. But these content syndication programs have far more moving parts, and so as a result, there's a sort of a higher barrier to entry on them. But one of the important things is it is going to take some time to see results, particularly if you have a longer sales cycle. So you're going to need to consider that. It's not necessarily immediately obvious what kind of results you're going to end up achieving here if it's only been, let's say, a week into the program. Obviously, if you're getting a series of responses from the prospect saying, I don't recall signing up for this, or you know, I'm in a completely different industry and this isn't relevant for me, then those types of leads are going to be ones that you're going to want to dispute, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But basically, in terms of considerations, just know what your sales cycle is. Look for measuring opportunities. So it may not necessarily be sales, but okay, how many of these leads are turning into good proposals, into good opportunities? If you are able to lead score them in some way, then you can put them into a nurturing cycle with a marketing automation solution. So whether it be timeline to purchase or some other factors that are going to be cues for you to say, well, these are interesting, but they're not the top of our list, then you may not necessarily want to follow up on them right away and put them rather into a bit of a nurturing program until they hit some sort of threshold, and then your sales team can jump in and follow up on those ones. So if you do use a marketing automation solution, you know, there's a lot of tools out there, and I was talking at HostingCon, and one of the questions came up. But you know, common ones are Marketo and Eloqua and Pardot, but there's a whole bunch of other ones as well, and different price points and structures and whatnot. Okay. So moving on here, go it alone. This is the last scenario. So basically, what we'd be looking at here is to say, well, I want to do all this myself. We're going to generate our own leads. We don't need to go through any kind of content syndication network. And what does this type of process look like? Well, the first thing is that you need, if you're going to use what would be otherwise a content syndication network, then you're going to need to create the content yourself, and you're going to need to promote it in some way. So you're going to need to be able to promote it. You're going to need traffic, and so you're going to need to be able to have a database to tap into. You're going to need to purchase possibly some lists. You're going to need to run some ad campaigns, some search traffic, etc. So you're going to need to drive traffic to the site. And one of the things that's going to be a bit of a challenge in this type of a structure is to say, well, if you want to focus it on a specific geography, or you have other targeting requirements, let's say, for example, employee size, all of a sudden some of these things become very difficult to do when you want to do it by yourself. If you want geography, well, you can do that to some extent in search, but you can't do that very well with employee size through search, for example. Employee size and geography are sometimes, well, geography is sometimes possible, and employee size, again, impossible if you're looking at running, let's say, some sort of display campaign where it would be a banner or a sponsored ad or something talking about an upcoming webinar or to download a white paper. You're not going to be able to get that same level of targeting. So your option might be to purchase lists and to drive traffic back to a specific landing page that you've created, which leads me to the next point, which is that you're going to need to have a lead capture system in place, and that those create the landing pages yourself, capture those leads, put them into your CRM or your system that you're using for marketing follow-up. If you're running a webinar, then you're going to need to have lead nurturing emails to remind people of the upcoming webinar and sending out reminders and that type of thing. Of course, you're also, if you're running a webinar, going to need to secure your platform for delivery. So, for example, GoToMeeting, WebEx, whatever the platform that you end up using, but you're going to need to get access to that and manage that process. And talked about this already, but unlikely you're going to be able to target by employee size or geography. You could ask some of those custom questions, for example, timeline for purchase, operating systems, etc. You can ask some of those on your landing pages, certainly, so you'll be able to get that bit of information. But our experience has been that the end result, when it's all said and done, when you pay for the platform, if you're running a webinar and buy all of the different advertising and have somebody spend time doing all of this, purchasing lists, and of course there's no guarantee just because you're purchasing a list on essentially a CPM basis, a per email address basis, or if you're purchasing advertising, it's going to be CPM based or CPC, and of course CPC or bidded pay-per-click on Google. There's no kind of guarantee as to whether those people are actually going to sign up and become potential leads for you. So as opposed to if you run a particular content syndication type program where it's a guaranteed CPL rate and you're only going to pay for leads. So the next, I've got a few slides here that I'm going to finish off with, which just talk a little bit about and some statistics here that were put together by HubSpot. This was a presentation that they gave at one point a number of months ago, but I was alluding to a couple of these earlier in the presentation. So the first one is offer types ranked by perceived value, and the reality is isn't really a whole lot of difference for most of them. You can see that downloadable kit ranks as the highest in terms of perceived value, and that a demo or consultation ranks lowest. Really, the difference there just being the demos are going to invoke a sort of an immediate knee-jerk reaction that, gee, someone's going to follow up with me, someone's going to call me, I'm going to have to be put on the spot to make a decision, whereas the rest of these are more in the due diligence research phase, and a downloadable kit is ranking #1, but really, as far as I'm concerned, webinars is pretty close behind, and in even white papers isn't really a significant difference. The next one is conversion rate by reference to content type. So if you're running a webinar, if you're running a white paper, the last one is report on the far right side, and with and without. So to what extent are these leads converting to sales, and with and without these types of assets, and you can get a sense here. Again, webinars sort of got that higher perceived, I think, perceived value, and also a higher conversion rate. And webinar and white paper, and that's part way I focused on those two. They're the most common ones in this presentation, but the webinar and white paper. But certainly explore others if you've got other things that you can look at. It mentions here downloads, chapters, tools, free trials, best practices, buyer's guides, those types of things. Next one here is just a reference to the word free. So free report, free white paper, free webinar. That word in particular is particularly appealing. One thing here is this graph's a little bit misleading because if you look at the scale on the side, it's only about 0.5%. Well, it is 0.5% increments. So the difference between free with and without is not as large as it appears to be, but nonetheless, probably not overly surprising that conversion rates tend to be higher with the word free. This one is conversion rates by number of form fields. So if you're asking for more information, then at a certain point this drops off. I think the important thing to note here is that you can get up to about 5. If you see I'll see if I can draw on here. Oops. It's not working. So if you see it, the number 5 is got the highest conversion, or sorry, the highest conversion rate before it starts to drop off. And so form fields are going to be those those custom questions. And the interesting thing though is that although it does start to drop off beyond about 8, not only does it increase a little bit, but it doesn't really seem to change much beyond that. So this is partly why the networks, of course, are charging more for form fields, and that they, in most cases, will cap it at about 3. So up to 3 custom fields that you can include. The next one is conversion rate by number of select boxes. So select boxes are things like how many employees do you have, what is your timeline for purchase. So basically where there's some kind of drop down and pre-selected options, and then again these are these custom questions where the conversion rates are steadily decreasing here thoroughly, and again, custom questions are typically capped at about 3 as a maximum. So just finishing up here, just as a summary, really the important thing in terms of looking at these different options is to, first of all, evaluate the potential for a return on investment. If you've got a large database you can tap into, then by all means that might make sense for you to try to do it yourself. If you are selling a solution that is at a low price point, low sales cycle, doesn't require a lot of information, you might be wanting to look at a form fill. But if your sales cycle is longer and there's a more sophisticated buying cycle and perhaps more than one decision maker, then you might want to consider the content syndication programs. So knowing your ROI means knowing your average lifetime value of a customer and knowing average close rates, so that you can run some calculations to see whether you can make the numbers work based on the cost per lead figures that I've given you and that you would be ultimately quoted. Important to evaluate your ability to handle leads. Do you have a sales team? If you don't have a sales team, there's no point in generating a series of leads that need to be followed up on. You're going to be better to put those into a lead nurturing program. And secondly, if you do have a sales team, how available are they to jump on the leads immediately and to follow up on those leads? Evaluate targeting requirements, so whether it's geography or different filters that you might want to include. And then based on all of these things, decide on the type of program that you want to run. And then particularly if you're running a content syndication program, make sure you ask all these questions. Are these leads exclusive? What are the timelines of purchase? How would the cost vary if we were to change the subject matter, or we were to look at running a webinar versus a white paper, or any of the other factors. So ask a lot of these questions, become informed, and make an educated decision, and it makes sure, of course, that you can track data. So it's unfortunately more common than you might expect to run programs where the company, the marketer, doesn't have access to information that may or may not necessarily lie directly with them, but they may not have statistics or data to support how many of those leads closed, or how many are in the pipeline, how many are sitting as sort of outstanding opportunities. So to have the tools in place is certainly going to be an important piece to evaluate the success. And with that, Liam, I'm going to turn it over to you for any questions.
Okay, thanks, Harlan. So yeah, I'd like to invite anyone who wants to submit some questions. We're probably going to keep this pretty brief because we're getting pretty close to the top of the hour here, but I've got a couple questions I've written down that I wanted to just put to you, so if anyone wants to submit theirs through the webinar software, they can do that now, and I'll keep an eye on those while I ask these. I guess, first of all, how do you go about verifying specific leads that come in? I mean, how do you know they're real people and that they're, real data?
Sure. So if they're obvious names, if it's Bill Clinton, Bart Simpson, those ones are going to be rejected. You can, and you'll get credit for those. So if they were delivered to you, you'd get credit back. Also, a lot of times, if the email address and the keyword is and phone number don't work together, then you would get credit back. But if one of them works and the other one doesn't, then that would still, in most cases, count as a lead. Beyond that, there are very few, but there are a couple of options for phone verification. Sometimes it's all done as part of the same processing company, but in other cases it may be that there's a third-party call center essentially that's verifying the phone leads. But again, if you're paying X dollars for those leads, there's going to be some extra premium to have them phone verified. So it's going to certainly increase the cost. Beyond that, the reality is that there isn't anything, particularly with form fills, that's the reason you're only paying $10, $15, $20 maybe is because there's not a real level of sophistication there and any kind of vetting.
Okay. One thing I'd like to address is that I know that a very obvious question right now and a very good question, and a question we've received a couple times here is, what are some of the better channels for distributing content for generating leads this way? Because one of our objectives it's a bit tricky for us. One of the objectives as the WHIR is to be objective about this, and we don't have a lot of insight into what's happening at some of the other venues for hosting information out there. We're a little hesitant to be endorsing anything in particular or to be seen as endorsing anything in particular. What I would like to suggest that you do if you have that question, and hopefully this is okay with Heartland, I'm just going to say it's a great question and there are, I'm sure, good answers to that question. Just email Heartland and ask him that question offline, and he can answer you outside of the webinar. Hopefully that's okay for everyone.
I'd be happy to do that.
Great. So I guess another thing that I think is a pretty key question is when you've got a lead generation tool or venue that you want to pursue, whether it's a white paper or whether you've got a particular blog you want to try, a white paper you've produced. I mean, when you get this sort of sense for the price, how do you evaluate that against your ARPU or your revenue goals, and how are you going to turn those those leads into profitable customers in the right amount of time?
Well, this sort of goes back to the one of the last points I was making. It's the first thing is to understand what your time frame for a sale is. So if you're expecting to be, if your sales cycle is a year long or 6 months long, which is certainly not at all unreasonable in this space. Obviously, if you're selling shared hosting, it's very unreasonable. But if you're selling highly complex managed services or whatnot, it certainly could be 6 months. And so understanding that, and then understanding the lifetime value of the customers and your close rate. So I mean, if you're just by way of example, take let's say you were to pay just to make the numbers simple and say $100 per lead, and you close 25% of the proposals or leads rather that you that are generated, then that's basically 1 in 4, and you'd be looking at about a $400 cost per sale. And so if you're selling something that where it may be a $2,000 a year commitment, then $400 per sale is probably going to be something that you can handle. Obviously, if you're selling shared VPS hosting for $100 or $200 or $300 a year, then it's not going to make sense, likely, although they may stay with you for a number of years, so that lifetime value may still make sense. It's going to be unlikely that these types of programs are going to you can make the numbers work. They're not cheap. They're not necessarily appropriate for all circumstances.
Okay. Here's a very interesting question. So, is there an opportunity, or are there opportunities to generate quality B2B leads from social networking sites, like if you're doing it on Facebook or on LinkedIn?
Absolutely, but those would be outlets to promote the white paper or to promote the webinar. So that was done in this instance here with this webinar. But you ultimately be looking to drive those people back if you're looking at a content syndication network. I mean, otherwise, if you're looking at a form fill type situation, you're still going to need to put some kind of question or some kind of a survey or pique people's interest from those networks in some way to drive them back to a landing page. So I mean, if you were doing that yourself, you wouldn't be running these programs externally. You would be. I mean, there's no point in paying a content syndication network for leads that essentially you're driving through social channels. I mean, you're paying them on a per lead basis to drive the leads. So for you to spend a bunch of time promoting it through social networks, you might as well drive them back to your own site and facilitate that webinar yourself. at a different date and time, identical webinar, or provide the identical white paper. But as a result, you're not going to end up, you're going to bypass paying for those leads directly. So the answer is yes. I think it makes lots of sense. It just doesn't. You wouldn't want to combine it with one of these other programs.
Maybe more like a key component of that go-it-alone strategy we're talking about.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, well, we're actually a couple minutes past the hour now, so I think this is probably a good time to wrap things up. I would love to thank everyone for attending, and thank you very much for submitting questions. Of course, I'd like to thank Heartland very much for offering some pretty great insight into a really challenging question for service providers. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.